Hey guys, tonight we will talk about the strange world of old-time medicine. It was sometimes gross, it was also funny by accident. Most doctors at that time knew a little. They guessed a lot, and they spoke with great confidence in very big robes. Let me know in the comments where you are watching from, and what time it is for you. It is always interesting to see our viewers from all over the world. Now, make the lights low. Maybe put a fan on for a soft sound. And let us start tonight's story together. You are a doctor from the Middle Ages. You feel very skilled, not because you passed an exam, not because you learned from a master, and surely not because your methods work, but because you have a long robe. You can say phlegmatic, and you have a Latin book that you looked at once during a big storm. You wake up in your wooden house just before the sun rises. The air has a smell of wet straw. It also smells like candle wax, and the small regret of last night's onion soup. Your bed is not much more than bumpy hay in a bag. You are 30 years old, which in this time means you are respected, you are experienced, and you are one bad sickness away from being done with work. You stretch, you cough nicely into a cloth, and get ready for a full day of making people well. A term you use very freely. You do not have a stethoscope. It has not been made yet. You do not use soap either. You believe in the cleaning power of incense and mean looks. No official papers hang on your wall, but nobody asks. After all, you speak Latin. You own 4 whole books. And you once said a man was better after he threw up in 4 directions. You are almost a man who works wonders. You put on your clothes with care, long wool robes to show you have studied, and a big hat to cover the fact that you do not know what is making all the skin sores. You put your medical bag on your shoulder. It is filled with knives, dried plants, and the small hope that nobody asks you to tell them how kidneys operate. Today, like many days, you will look at urine. You will tell people their body liquids are not balanced, and maybe let out a pint of blood from a person with a sore tooth. You are not scared. You have done this many times, probably, and if events turn bad, you have your excuses ready. Bad air, a life of sin, or Mars is in the wrong place again. In the worst situation, you suggest prayer and back away with slow steps. You eat your bread, you drink a little weak beer. It is safer than the water, and you walk outside. You're not just a man, you're a medical man, a person who heals, a smart person, and nobody at all needs to know that you once treated a belly ache with crushed garlic and pigeon feathers. Your secret is safe for now. Your day starts, as all great medical jobs do, with a cup of warm pee, not your urine. Of course, that would be strange. This one is from your first patient, who was kind enough to bring it in a pot of clay soon after sunrise. It is still warm. Being fresh is important in your job. You place it on the table like a good wine, and hold it toward the light. What little light you have coming through your small window stained with smoke. You move it around slowly. You breathe in deeply and make a wise sound with your mouth that says, "Ah, yes? This man is clearly sick from too much phlegm, and also maybe from jealousy. Welcome to uroscopy, the old art of finding illness by looking at urine, its color, its clearness, its smell, its thickness, and yes, sometimes its taste are the main tools you have. Forget medical listening devices. Forget temperature tools. You have 16 shades of yellow. A confusing chart from a religious house in Flanders. And a feeling learned from years of acting like you know what you are doing. Clear and light. That is good. Dark orange. Liver issues. Dark brown. Probably hot bile or a penalty from Mars. Blue, witchcraft. For sure, witchcraft. If your patient's urine has bubbles in it, that might mean he is close to dying. If it does not, you might still tell him he is close to dying, just to be safe. After all, people like honesty. You might even heat the sample with a candle to stir the body liquids. A bit like warming soup before you eat it. You then write your discoveries on a small wax board and write a line in a Latin style that even you will have trouble reading later. And when your patient with fear asks what is wrong, you nod with wisdom, point at the jar, and say a line like, "Your collar is swollen and your spleen is sad." Avoid figs, loud sounds, and women called Agnes. You give him a bag of plants, a small lucky charm, and maybe a leech, and send him on his way. Feeling both puzzled and a little bit reassured, because in the end, what is important is not making him well. It is sounding like you could if you really wish to. As a doctor from the Middle Ages, you do not ask your patient if he has been sleeping, eating well, or touched moldy bread. No, you ask the real questions like, how often has black bile visited you this week? Because every person knows your body is run by 4 special liquids: blood, phleg, yellow bile, and black bile. It is not about tiny germs or sicknesses or what you eat. That is silly talk for the future. The human body is like a big pot of wet old-time soup boiling, and your task is to be sure no single ingredient is winning. Let us say your patient is mad and his face is red. Clearly too much blood. The solution: you take some of it out. He is sleepy and his face is white. That is too much phleg, probably from eating cold meals or talking to a person with a low moral character. Yellow bile means he is grumpy and throws up. Black bile. That one is for just about every other problem, including bad dreams, deep sadness, and writing poems. Your whole medical plan is just advanced pipework with a moral edge. You fix the body liquids with food, plants, enemas, throwing up, letting blood, or ideally all of those things. If the body is warm and wet, you suggest cold and dry food because the fix for internal lack of balance is clearly more lack of balance. But in the other direction, your patient does not need clear thinking. He needs sage boiled in goat milk while facing east. Of course, no 2 doctors have the same idea on exactly how much bile is too much. But that is okay. Having different ideas makes you sound smarter. You use phrases like humoral disc and temperamental flux to fill any holes in knowledge. The important thing is to look calm while he is scared. And if he dies, well, it was not your mistake. It was his phlegm or maybe Saturn or that bad life he lived before asking you for help. Either way, you keep your good name, because in old-time medicine, the body liquids must be followed, even if no person, including you, really knows what they are doing. It is not about making people better. It is about balance and sounding smart while suggesting mustard packs for a cracked rib. As a doctor from the Middle Ages, you believe in balance, specifically the balance of body liquids. And when things feel wrong, say your patient has a fever or a headache or a bad dream about pigs, there is only one solution: let the blood out. You do not need a diagnosis. You need a bowl, a blade, and the bravery to do it before breakfast. The idea is easy. Blood is hot and wet. If a person is too hot or too wet or just a bit annoying, a little bit of drainage brings him back to peace or to being unconscious. Either way, your job is done. You might open a vein in the arm or behind the knee if you want to be special. The neck is for hard cases or for a very dramatic look. And do not worry, You have a chart from a 12th century monk that tells you which vein matches with which organ. It is probably correct. He looks sure of himself. Your patient lies down, arm out, face white, though that might just be fear for what is coming. You tie a tight cloth to make the veins get bigger. Say a line in Latin to sound smart, and make the cut. The blood starts to come out. You nod with a serious face. Your helper faints. You gather the blood in a clay bowl. There is no certain amount, just enough for the patient to stop complaining or to start to wobble. Some doctors say they can read the sickness in the blood's thickness or smell. You mostly act like you can too. Sometimes. You trade the blade for a leech if you want a method that uses less of your hands and is much more wiggly. Leeches are quiet, can be used again, and are always hungry. They are also very good listeners. When it is done, you wrap the arm, give some weak beer, and suggest rest. Not too much rest. Though, being lazy makes phlegm grow. If the patient walks away, you say he is better. If he passes out, he is successfully cleaned out. If he dies, it was too late to help. Because in your world, bloodletting is not just a fix, it is a way of life, and you have not even eaten your turnip soup yet. You finish your morning bloodletting work, wipe your hands on your robe or the closest helper, and get ready for the day's real chance. House visits, specifically the houses of people who can pay for things like walls, helpers, and not dying. Poor people are okay for learning, but they usually pay in chickens, work, or a thank you with tears. Noble families, on the other hand, pay in coins, nice words, and sometimes strange invites to supper, where a person is clearly dying at the table. You pack your bag, leeches, creams, saws, and a group of dried plants that all smell a bit like hay and sadness. You check that your hat is tall and your robe is heavy. This is not just about making people well. It is about looking important. Upon coming to the big house, you are met by a helper who clearly does not trust you, but says nothing because you are wearing velvet and holding a bag of knives. The air smells like beeswax, wet stone, and something boiled. A woman faints in the hall. No person talks about it. Your patient is lying in a large bed with 4 posts, surrounded by wall hangings and worried family members. He has a fever, a swollen foot, and a strong belief that you are about to fix it with what is in that jar. You ask the normal questions. What has he eaten? How often has he bathed? Never. Has Mercury recently passed by Saturn? Then you look with wisdom into the fire for a full 5 seconds before saying it is a lack of balance of the body liquids. Probably bile. For sure, not a demon. Unless the problems get worse on Sundays. You suggest something that sounds official. A paste of crushed mint and powdered snail shell. Maybe you tell him to stay away from cold wind, red meat, or thinking too hard. You order bed rest, which he is already doing very well. Before you go, the lady of the house puts coins into your hand, hoping you are worth more than the priest who came by last week and just put holy water on everything and left. You nod with a serious face, promise to come back and remind them. If the swelling goes up, send for you right away. If it goes down, send for the priest. You call it a medical bag. Every other person calls it a reason to run away. Your bag is heavy, not with hope or healing, but with a scary group of objects that would not look wrong in a jail. And still, this is what you carry every day. Your old-time doctor's kit, your pride and joy, your movable case of please stay still. You open it up before each visit like a man who does magic showing his tricks. Inside, a scary mix of sharp, rusty, a bit holy, and very dirty. First, your knives, not medical blades, just real knives, sharp enough to open skin, not sharp enough to make you feel safe. One for cutting, one for draining, and one you use to spread soft cheese at lunch. They all look the same. Then there are the hooks for pulling out bad teeth or taking out things that are not meant to be there. You have saws for taking off limbs, hot irons for closing wounds with fire, and a trepan for drilling holes in skulls when a person gets a headache that is clearly from spirits stuck in the brain. You carry leeches, of course, kept in a small jar, wiggling with excitement. Each one has a name. You try not to love them. In a smaller bag, you keep your creams and powders, crushed plants, dried lizard tails, ground antler, maybe some strange stones a person promised cured belly sickness. You have not tried to label anything. It is more fun to guess. There is also a urine bottle used for finding sickness and sometimes as a weight for your papers when the wind blows your notes. And let us not forget the star chart for finding out if Venus is hurting your patient's spleen. Bandages, not common. Soap, just an idea. Clean water, You wrap it all in a cloth that has not been washed since the last big sickness and hope no person asks why the blade has dried blood on it. A holy item from Saint Sebastian, you explain. They nod with respect. You both continue. And in some way, this bag, this scary, clanging, maybe cursed object, gives you power. You walk into a room, open it, and people think you know exactly what you are doing, which in a way you do. You are doing your best, just not with gloves. You walk into the sick room, take one look at the white, sweaty nobleman lying on the bed, and right away check the most sensible source of medical help. The sky. That is right. You are not just a doctor. You are a skywriter of human pain. And in your world. No diagnosis is done without checking if Saturn is in the wrong place or if Jupiter is being very harsh today. You reach for your trusted zodiac chart covered in marks that would scare a modern science teacher. Aries controls the head, Pisces rules the feet, and everything in the middle is split up nicely across the horoscope like an old-time game board. If the patient's belly hurts and the moon is in Virgo, that is clearly a bad sign. Not for you, for him. You nod slowly, with drama. The patient watches with big eyes as you talk about Mercury going backward near his liver. The stars. You explain. Control the flow of body liquids in the body. Mars makes fevers. Saturn makes sadness. Venus. That one makes wrong swelling and strange family fights. When you do things matters. You would not dare to do bloodletting while the moon is growing. Every person knows that is how you get sudden fainting and marriage troubles. And God help a person who has a baby during a sun eclipse. That is almost asking for the child to grow up with a bad leg and strong ideas. Patients almost never doubt this system. After all, it sounds smart and it gives them a vague thing to blame their sickness on. Like Mars being mad instead of you licked moldy bread again. You sometimes chart their personal horoscope just to make the meeting longer. Birth hour, rising sign, place of the moon when he first sneezed 3 days ago. All very important data points in finding why his shoulder is full of hot bile. And when your diagnosis is done, you say it with respect. Your phlegm is heavy because Venus is wet this week. No person knows what that means, least of all you. But they nod. They pay. They thank you for your smart thoughts. And off you go, sky wizard of the leeches, ready to heal more souls with nothing but a compass, a candle, and the wrong trust of the sick. You're about to cut a man open with a knife you also use to slice cheese. Everything is going to be just fine. It is surgery day, not because the moon is right or the patient's body liquids are calm, but because the swelling has started to smell like cooked onions, and a person finally shouted loud enough to get your attention. You lay out your tools: a dull knife, a bone saw, a rag wet with wine, and something that looks a bit like bravery. There is no drug to stop pain. The patient gets two things: a cup of ale and the advice to bite something wooden and think about good memories. You comfort him with a warm smile and a phrase like, "This might hurt a little." It will not. It will hurt a lot. You start cutting. There is shouting. There is shaking. At some point, a person passes out. Hopefully, it is not you. Your helper holds the patient down while also looking like he would rather be learning from a baker or a dead body. The wound opens, and you do what every old-time surgeon does: poke around with confidence and hope for help from God. You might take out sick flesh, drain some strange pus, or pull out a bad tooth with something that looks like garden clippers. You are not too worried about germs. You do not know they are real. You believe sickness comes from bad air, or maybe a weak character. Either way, your tools have not been cleaned since the last time you used them, which was on a goat. Maybe you did not ask. Once the job is done, you pour wine on the wound for cleaning and for show. Then seal it with hot iron or spiderweb soaked in oil, both of which are medically doubtful, but sound good. You wrap it in linen and tell the patient to rest. He will either get better in a wonderful way or die in 2 days. Either way, you did your job. And if any person doubts your work, you point out that Galen once took out a gladiator's spleen with a bronze hook, and he is still thought to be a smart man. Because in your world, surgery is not about success. It is about confidence, speed, and the patient shouting a little less than normal. When you are not sure, put a leech on it, or several, or a dozen, depending on how serious you want to look. You have tried prayers. You have tried plants. You have even tried cutting into people with the care of a meat seller on market day. But nothing says professional medicine quite like putting live worms on a human body and nodding like you know what you are doing. Leeches are your main remedy, the Swiss Army knife of old-time healthcare. Fever, leech; headache, leech; swollen ankle, broken heart; strange shaking related to ghosts. Leech, leech, and leech. You carry them in a small jar, or as you call it, the squirming cup of wonders. They're kept wet, grumpy, and well-fed. Hopefully, not too well-fed. No one likes a lazy leech. The patient, of course, is not sure. He sees a slimy black worm and thinks you're crazy. But you promise him this is a fine and old method used by learned men in fine robes. You do not say that some of those men were monks guessing wildly or barbers just trying to take the minds of clients off the smell of boiled socks. You pick a healthy-looking leech, plump, full of energy, wanting blood like a tiny Gothic vampire. You put it to the skin, often behind the ear or on a part of the forearm with veins, and wait if it holds on quickly. You smile and say, "Ah, yes?" The leech agrees with your lack of balance. If it does not, you mumble a line about Mercury being in retrograde and try again. Soon, the leech gets big with blood. Your patient turns white. You act like this is completely normal. You say things like, "He is pulling out the bad things," or "Your bile was acting badly." Once the leech is full, you take it off with salt or vinegar. Or if you are feeling mean, you just let it fall off on its own, dramatically big and very happy. The patient, dizzy and worried, asks if he is cured. You say, "We have taken a good first step." Translation: you have no idea, but the leech looks happy. And sometimes that is enough to keep every person believing in the magic, because in the end, the best thing about leeches is that they do all the work and they never ask for money. As a doctor from the Middle Ages, your knowledge of the human mind is, let us say, open to ideas. You have no psychology degree, no brain science, and no interest at all in knowing the long-term results of stress. What you do have is a strong belief that if a person's actions are strange, it is either sinful, from another world, or both. Your first patient of the day is a woman who has not spoken in 2 weeks. She stares at walls, sometimes hums, and once threw a spoon at her husband's cousin. In your book, this can only mean one thing: taken over by spirits, maybe more than one. You do your normal diagnostic act. Ask the priest if he is free. Sprinkle some holy water and light a candle that smells a bit of sadness and goat fat. Then, with the most seriousness, you tell her family that she has been taken by deep sadness caused by too much black bile or a small demon named Gregory. Of course, melancholia is your main diagnosis for sadness, worry, being quiet, poetry, and any woman who reads too much. Your treatment choices include plant packs, bleeding, forced prayer, or if things get really wild, an exorcism for the truly crazy. There is always the religious house or the local madhouse, which is just a fancy barn with a big lock and some hay. There, patients are often treated with cold baths, whipping and shouted holy words. The idea is easy. If their mind is broken, scare it back into working. Some doctors try trepanation, drilling holes into the skull to let out the spirits. You have not tried it yourself, but you nod with respect when others talk about it. A bold move. Women, of course, get special care. If one is too emotional, she has hysteria caused by her womb moving around the body like a bored house cat. You suggest calming plants, a cold pack, and for her to stop thinking so much. Maybe marriage, maybe a long religious trip. If the patient gets better, a holy blessing. If she does not, God's decision. Either way, your mind is clear, because in your job, mental sickness is not a problem. It is a trouble from the sky, and your job is not to know it. It is to live through it without getting it. You walk into town with your tall hat and your Latin phrases, just after draining a nobleman's elbow. You are with no question the smartest man alive, or at least in walking range. But then, a bad thing happens. Your patient is also visiting an apothecary. How could he? Apothecaries are the old-time version of pharmacists, but with more attitude and fewer rules. They grind plants, boil roots, mix strange pastes, and somehow really help people, which is honestly making you mad. They do not quote Aristotle. They do not carry charts of planet positions. They just give out medicine that smells like regret and really does a thing. You, however, are a university-trained physician, or at least you own a book that says so. You do not lower yourself to hard work like measuring powders or boiling bark. Your job is to point at the stars, talk about bile, and order vague ideas. Let the apothecary find out what a cooling drink with moon power even means. Still, patients often trust them. After all, apothecaries live in town, know every person's secrets, and have not by accident bled a person to death this week. Their shops smell of thyme and honey, not burned bandages and clove oil sadness. The competition is strong. You think they are interfering plant sellers, They think you are an overpaid robe with a God problem. You say they poison the sick with folk fixes. They say you charge 4 silver coins to mumble. Your spleen is acting up. Sometimes you work together with reluctance. You order a treatment so vague it is basically a feeling, and they make something that might help, but for sure will not kill. If the patient gets better, you take the praise. If not, you quietly suggest the apothecary did not boil the mandrake root long enough. Of course, neither of you really wins. The patient ends up with less money. The town gets another health story, and the local priest says it was help from God all along. But at least you kept your good name, because in old-time medicine, you do not need to be good at your job. You just need to be louder, richer, and a bit more scary than your competition. You do not need to know how plants work, just which ones make patients a bit less loud. You are an old-time doctor, which means you are an expert in plants automatically, mostly because every person thinks you are. After all, you own a book with faded ink pictures of plants, some dried leaves in a bag, and the confidence of a man who once told a person to eat sage for a leg wound. Today's patient comes with a problem called inner movement, which could mean belly cramps, a broken heart, or maybe a demon's power. You look through your bag of mystery plants and decide with confidence that valerian root should work. Why? Because it smells strong and makes people sleepy. 2 good signs that it is doing a thing. You also keep a supply of wormwood, which you order for digestion, fleas, and people who bother you. There is nettle for pain, mallow for swelling, and mandrake, which you only use when you want to look like you have a secret. It is a little poisonous, very expensive, and shaped a bit like a person, perfect for making an impression on the uneducated. The truth is, you do not really know what each plant does, and neither does any other person. You follow tradition, vague stories, and whatever the monk down the road promises cured his cousin's goat. You grind, boil, and mash with excitement, all while saying Latin words to make it feel official. Sometimes you add honey, not for medical reasons, just because everything tastes like wet dirt otherwise. And patients complain less when their spleen drink does not taste like a punishment. If the fix works, you nod with a serious face and say, "The fever has given up to the herb's cool quality." If it does not, you blame the patient for not believing strong enough. And when you are out of ideas, you mix several plants together and pray one of them stops the others. It is a bit like a game of chance, but with more throwing up. You also say you must find your own ingredients when you can, because wild plants are clearly stronger, or at least dirtier, which makes them more rustic. In the end, your plant cures are 30% tradition, 20% guessing, and 50% acting. But hey, at least they do not scream when you give them a cup of tea, no matter how much leeching, bleeding, or plant mashing you do. You are never really by yourself in your medical job because the church is always nearby, like a very worried parent or a nosy neighbor who also happens to run your whole way of thinking and political system. Your patient has a fever, you can try a paste. But first you should probably see if he has told his sins. Coughing up blood sounds like a penalty from God. Best send for the priest before you even think about opening your apothecary bag. Making people well is fine as long as you do not do better than God. You have been warned before. That one time you cured a nobleman's gout with vinegar and hot rocks. People said it was close to magic. That time you suggested the stars might affect digestion. Almost heresy. And when you thought for a moment about trying to cut open a dead body, You might as well have suggested talking to trees. Of course. The church has its own ideas about healing, namely prayer, holy items, and sometimes touching bones wrapped in gold. You do not fight. You just sigh quietly and make space for the priest to sprinkle holy water on your patient while you stand there holding a jar of mashed garlic in shame. Sometimes you even work together. You give the earthly treatment and the priest gives the heavenly comfort. If the patient gets better, it is a wonder. If he does not, well, God's strange decision, and maybe you need more incense. You have learned to work with it. You start your treatments with a quick, "May God guide my blade," and end with a strong "Amen," just in case a person is listening. You also keep a small crucifix in your bag, not for healing, but for pushing away doubt when a person says you are thinking too much. You are, after all, a man of science, a vague, soft, blood-soaked version of science, but still, just not the kind that doubts the church if the limb is rotting, sick, or just generally hard to look at. Why not take it off? It is the old-time way. You have bled, you have cleaned out, you have leached. You even tried praying near the patient while waving a handful of thyme. And still, the leg looks worse than a loaf of bread left in the rain for 3 weeks. That is when you know it is time to amputate. You do not make this choice with ease, mostly because it is hard work and you did not eat breakfast. But when the wound is black, the smell is not natural, and the patient's moans have become a scary silence. You sharpen the saw. The arrangement is easy. You find the patient a strong table and a strong friend to hold him down. A helper brings the amputation kit: 1 saw, 1 tight band, 1 rag to bite, and 1 large jug of ale for medical reasons. Not for the patient, for you. You explain the process softly, using words like needed, brave, and maybe survivable. The patient turns white. You nod with understanding. You would be scared too if a person with your level of skill was coming at your thigh with a glorified bread knife. You tie the tight band very tight. Say a line about balance and body liquids just for looks and start cutting slowly at first. Then with more speed once the shouting reaches its highest point. The saw cuts through skin, fat, muscle, and finally, bone. You act like you do not feel sick. You are a professional. Once it is off, you throw the limb into a nearby bucket and right away burn the stump with a red-hot iron. The smell is one you will not forget. You blame the candle wax. Then comes bandaging. You wrap the wound tightly with linen and a quiet hope that sickness will not start by sunset. You tell the patient to rest, stay away from cold wind, and if he can, not die. If he lives, you are a man who works wonders. If he does not, you say with a serious face that the badness had moved to the soul. In truth, it is a harsh process. But sometimes amputation is the only way to save a life, or at least delay death a little while keeping your professional name. You hear coughing in the distance. Time to go home and act like you did not. It has been a long day. You have drained blood, fought with apothecaries, put leeches on at least 3 puzzled people, and took off 1 leg with the skill of a drunk woodworker. You are ready to end the day. But then you hear it, a rattle, a wheeze, a cough that sounds like it came out of the underworld. You stop, your apprentice stops. Even the leeches look worried. There is only one thing it could be. The plague is back. You have seen it before. The swelling, the black spots, the smell of onions and death. You remember the last time it came through. Your barber surgeon friend left town in a cart, and your favorite baker just disappeared. You reach for your mask, not because it is effective, but because it makes you feel better. It is filled with dried flowers, vinegar-soaked cloth, and wrong confidence. You do not know how diseases spread, but you do know that if the sick people get too close, you strangely stop being a doctor. You pack your tools fast. There is no time for saying goodbye. You mumble a line about the moon's effect and not eating as you back away from the town. The thing is, old-time medicine has no real fix for plague. You cannot bleed it out. You cannot put a paste on it. And you for sure cannot chant it into leaving. Your treatments go from burning plants to lighting entire parts of town on fire. One of those sometimes works. You think about writing down your discoveries, but choose not to. You would rather not be known for suggesting garlic water as a fix for the end of the world. Instead, you go to the countryside, maybe visit a religious house, maybe start making wine. Anything that does not involve open sores and very doubtful groaning. Because as an old-time doctor, you know when to help, and more importantly, you know when to vanish. The leeches wriggle in agreement. The stars say it is time, and your robe smells like burned basil and regret. You disappear into the fog like a medical magician with no fixes. And the townspeople, they will say, he did everything he could, which is technically correct. He just did it from far away. Imagine walking into a big old-time cathedral. Stone pillars stand like trees. Incense is in the air, and colored glass windows throw holy light across the seats. Normally, you would see serious monks saying Latin prayers and bishops in fancy robes. But not today. Today, there is a man up front in a bishop's hat, and he is drunk. His robes are on backward, his face has ash on it, and he just blessed the people by sticking out his tongue and showing his backside to the altar. Welcome to the Feast of Fools, one of the most wild shows ever allowed by the old-time church, held every year around the New Year, especially in France. The Feast of Fools was an approved explosion of mess. The idea was easy. Take the strictest group in old-time Europe, the church, and turn it upside down for a day. Choir boys dressed as church leaders. The low-level deacons chose a fool bishop or lord of misrule who led pretend masses filled with parody, gas, and sometimes real farm animals. Imagine the janitor becoming the boss for 24 hours and doing everything backward, with his eyes covered and drunk. That is the level of silliness we are talking about. But here is the wildest part. The church did not just let this happen. They held it. In fact, the events were often planned by cathedral groups themselves. Why? Because the strict social order needed a way to let out pressure. Life in old-time France was hard to breathe in. Poor people obeyed landowners, church leaders obeyed bishops, and every person obeyed God. Or else the Feast of Fools was their one legal chance to shout, laugh, and make fun of everything that held them down. It was like Mardi Gras meets an exorcism. People paraded through the streets wearing masks, playing lutes, singing dirty songs, and shouting holy insults with the happy freedom of jokers. Sometimes they even rode donkeys into churches. Holy water was changed with wine. Sermons were written again as dirty poems. The air smelled of ale and candle wax and mess. But it was not just silly fun. It was social criticism in a costume. These people knew exactly who they were making fun of. The powerful people who ruled them from ivory towers and golden thrones. And for just one day, the joke was finally on them. The result, holy lawlessness sung in perfect choir boy harmony. Every kingdom needs a leader, even one built on mess, and during the Feast of Fools, That leader was not a king, bishop, or baron. It was the Lord of Misrule, a crown-wearing court joker chosen from the lowest levels of the church, or sometimes even the town's most silly drunk man. Picture this: a tall teenager from the cathedral choir, who can hardly grow a beard, is suddenly carried through town on a pretend throne made of beer barrels. He is wearing very big bishop robes, a hat made from pig skin, and he blesses the people by throwing cabbage at them. This is no joke. This was tradition. The Lord of Misrule was the living example of reversal. Everything serious became a joke, everything holy, unholy. He would lead fake parades, reverse rituals, and wild parodies of Christian events. The gospel was read backward, incense was changed with smoke from burnt shoes, and in place of holy songs, people howled, snorted, and even meowed like cats. The people loved it. He had full control over the town for the day, leading pretend ceremonies and funny sermons that would make a modern-day stand-up comic turn red. His court had other clowns, jugglers, and messy churchmen who may or may not have been completely sober. They gave out fake pardons, held drunken trials, and sometimes put on pretend excommunications of powerful people, all with loud clapping. What made this risky and exciting was how close it came to being unholy. But that was the idea. This was not mindless mess. It was planned rebellion wearing the mask of fun. In fact, the choice of a low-level youth or peasant as the leader was not an accident. It was a funny jab at the divine right of kings and the holiness of bishops. By choosing a person who was silly, the people were not just laughing, they were showing how foolish the real power systems could be. If a choir boy could wear the robes and act out the sermons, how divine were they really? Church leaders often tried to stop the festival's worst parts, but never really did. The Lord of Misrule kept coming back year after year, more drunk and louder than ever, because as long as society had strict rules, the people would want a day to break them. You walk into a cathedral expecting serious songs and stern faces. Instead, you are met by a man in a donkey mask braying from the sermon stand, while a half-dressed monk juggles communion wafers in the walkway. Welcome to the center of the Feast of Fools, where the holy place became a stage, and no rule was too big to break. During the main part of the festival, real church buildings, those amazing echoing spaces were taken over by wild parody, not just outside in the town square, but right inside the belly of Christendom. The choir boys danced, the canons shouted dirty jokes, parades had people dressed as women, animals, and even demons. It was divine show in full breakdown. But the most famous show, the Ass Mass, where a donkey was led into the cathedral, allowed to bray at important moments in the service, and sometimes even answered the priest's lines. At the end, instead of amen, the people would cry, hey ha, hey haw, in perfect harmony. It sounds silly, because it was, but these acts had a sharp meaning. They were not just making fun of the rituals, they were making fun of the strictness, falseness, and self-importance of the church's leaders. The people knew the rules, and that is what made breaking them so good. Priests and bishops were often conflicted. Some joined in the joke, letting the craziness happen in hopes it would end on its own. Others were mad, trying hard to stop it, calling it heretical and wrong. Papal letters were sent. Bishops wrote angry letters and laws were made to stop the bad acts. And still it kept happening. Why? Because the cathedral was not just a holy place, it was the beating heart of the town, the one place every person had to take seriously every other day of the year. Turning it into a carnival place was not just fun, it was freedom. For one wild day, the stone walls that stood for divine power became the background for fart jokes and beer-soaked shows. Even the clergy could not help but laugh sometimes, because when your daily life is filled with fear of sin, confession, and eternal punishment, the chance to bray like a donkey in God's house, that is beyond price. What makes a joke funny in old-time France? Dressing up like a bishop and doing a pretend exorcism on cheese, or giving a sermon in nonsense Latin while wearing underpants on your head. During the Feast of Fools, humor was not just welcomed, it was used as a weapon, and its sharpest aim, the very rituals that held society together. The parody was precise. People knew the Mass by heart. They had to, after all. Most of the performers were subdeacons, minor church leaders, or choir boys. That meant they knew the service well enough to twist it. The result was silly, unholy, and funny in its accuracy. They copied prayers with rude rhymes, turned psalms into drinking songs, and gave sermons that praised eating too much, lust, or the holiness of wine. These were not just jokes for the sake of laughter. They were barely hidden comments on the growing separation between the clergy and the people. When a parody Mass changed incense for manure smoke, it was not just for shock. It was a criticism. One famous example involved a fake blessing of sausages during a pretend Lent complete with serious chants and holy motions. In another, a fake bishop blessed the crowd while urinating in a bucket hidden under his robes. Offensive, yes, but it made a point. If the church claimed spiritual greatness but enjoyed earthly bad habits, why not point it out? Mock holy items were carried through the streets. Chicken bones, boots, or pig's teeth, treated as holy objects and honored with great devotion. The people were saying very loudly, "We know what you were doing, and we can do it." 2. To the normal viewer, it was very funny. To the church, it was a big problem. Yet this making fun was also a kind of joining in. It showed that even in their rebellion, people stayed very involved with religious life. They cared enough to make fun, and they made fun because they understood. It was a strange kind of devotion, a way to struggle with divine power using laughter instead of following rules. But not every person laughed. Church leaders more and more saw these shows as spiritual poison, making the line between parody and heresy unclear. And as centuries went by, their patience became thin. Still, for those who did it, the feast was more than making fun. It was medicine, laughter in the face of a system too strict to bend. For a festival so wild, so rude, and so clearly unholy, you would think the church to stop it right away, right? And yet, for centuries, they did not. In fact, some of the very people who complained about its evil on Sunday helped plan it on Monday. Why? Because the hidden truth of the Feast of Fools was this: the clergy needed it. 2. Life inside the church was not just candles and holy books. It was very hard, without joy, and full of pressure. Many churchmen joined the ranks young, took promises of chastity and obedience, and spent their days saying prayers, copying books, and following strict routines that could break the spirit. The Feast of Fools gave a rare way to let out pressure. For one day a year, even priests could take off the heavy robes of holiness and relax. Sometimes, truly. Many subdeacons and low-ranking churchmen were supposed to join in. Some even looked forward to it. It was their moment in the light where they could perform, entertain. and enjoy without bad results. They copied their bosses, made fun of church politics, and made fun of religious falseness from the inside. The festival was disrespectful, yes, but also deeply clerical. The people who knew the church best were the ones turning it into a circus. And let us be honest, some bishops looked the other way because they liked it. It was easier to allow a day of mess than to handle secret rebellions or growing anger. Better to laugh once a year than to break under the weight of silence. There were even rules about how far the funny-making could go. Not official, of course, but known. It was a game with unspoken boundaries. Push too hard and you would be told. But stay within the line with smartness. You would get a wink and a cup of ale. Still, not every person inside the church agreed. Voices for reform began to grow louder by the late Middle Ages, calling the festival a shame to Christian honor. Preachers shouted from sermon stands that devils danced among the fools, and that the laughter echoing through cathedrals would someday be changed with cries of punishment. But the truth stayed, whispered in cloisters and sacristies. Sometimes the ones who wore the cross by day needed to wear a jester's cap by night just to stay sane. Outside the big church, the wild fun spread into the roads. The Feast of Fools was not just a private joke for church leaders. It was a complete town uprising, hidden as a joke. People who made bread stopped working. Metal workers joined the marches. Women at home became queens for one day. And every small street was full of singing, laughing, and sometimes a tipsy contest. The contest was about who could burp a holy prayer the loudest. Stores shut their doors. Open markets became temporary stages. People swapped their work clothes for silly outfits. They dressed as clowns, devils, animals, or funny versions of important people. Fake trials took place. People were accused of crimes like being too serious or not dancing. The penalty was a pie in the face. Or they were marched through town. They wore only a sheet and had a chicken on their head. And the people enjoyed it. This was because most of the year, a normal person from that time was weighed down. They had heavy taxes, not enough food, sickness, and the constant fear of punishment after death. There was no way to get away from the hard life. The only break was during the celebration. And it seemed like only fun and play. But a more important thing was going on. The people were answering back to their rulers. They used jokes as a tool for fighting. They used laughing as a form of protest. And they used nonsense to push back. No person was safe. Kings, lords, even the Pope could be shown as a tipsy puppet on a wagon. Laughing children would pull the wagon through the mud. These were brave and even risky actions, but they were hidden by a layer of jokes. Satire gave a voice to the people with no power, and as long as it was inside a joke, they could say how they truly felt. They could talk about the people who ruled them. Even young ones joined the fun. In some places, they picked a boy to be a bishop. He would march through the roads with a pretend church group following him. This was more than just a cute act. It was a direct test of the order of power. If a child could lead a march, what made the real bishop so important? Of course, the leaders in town complained. Some towns attempted to stop the wild behavior, but trying to make people be serious during the feast was like trying to clean a flood with a cracker. The festival mixed up every boundary, holy and unholy, ruler and ruled, real and silly. For one amazing day, the world was turned over, and no person wanted it to stop. It could not go on forever. Near the end of the Middle Ages, the Feast of Fools got the notice of more than just local bishops and cranky town leaders. Now, the church leaders in Rome started to look closely at what was going on in their own holy places. And they were not happy. You can picture the shock in the Pope's group. Holy churches turned into theaters stained with wine. The church service was made into a silly, rough show. And young church workers showed their bottoms to altars in front of crying statues of the Virgin Mary. The joking went from being allowed to being a scandal. And the worst part was, it was not fading away. It was becoming more inventive. Popes started to send out papers that condemned the festival. They called it unholy, evil, and a danger to Christian ways. The biggest hit came in 1445. The Church of Sens, one of the oldest and most respected archbishops in France, officially stopped the feast. Other areas did the same. Punishments were created for people who joined. Church workers caught making fun of rituals could lose their jobs. Towns that let the celebration happen were told they would be kicked out of the church. But the feast did not end without a fight. Even when official orders stopped it, secret versions grew. People just took the celebration to back roads, private houses, or hid it as another holiday. The feeling of the feast continued in other festivals. These included Carnival and Mardi Gras. In those festivals, masks, jokes, and making fun of leaders were still main ideas. And let us be truthful, the church did not just end the feast because it was rude. They ended it because it was a danger. When farmers make fun of priests and choir boys copy bishops, it makes the line between respect and protest unclear. Laughing might seem safe, but in a strict world, it is a fighting tool. It makes holes in the special glow of power. And after you have laughed at a thing, it is difficult to fear it in the same way again. By the 1600s, the Feast of Fools was mostly gone from official schedules. It was no longer blessed. It was no longer approved. It was no longer safe. But its effect remained. The masks, the disorder, the laughing, all of it would show up again in new ways. This is because you can stop a festival, you can stop a custom, but you cannot destroy the idea that sometimes the fool knows the truth better than the priest. So the church got strict. The big churches became quiet, and the Feast of Fools disappeared from official books. But if you believe the spirit of the festival ended, think again. The fool just got a new outfit. As the Middle Ages changed to the Renaissance, the feast's power seeped into new parts of life. It went into theater, carnival, satire, and masked shows. In truth, if you have ever watched a Mardi Gras parade or seen a Shakespeare play where the king's jester tells the truth to the powerful, you are seeing the long effect of the Feast of Fools. The medieval fool was not only a clown, he was a picture of things turned upside down. He was a moving review of the powerful group. He said what could not be said. He made fun of what could not be touched. And he danced when faced with seriousness. That custom continued. It was no longer in churches, but it was in bars, town centers, and groups of traveling actors. Even the church, strangely, used the fool's methods. Jesuit plays and moral dramas began to use humor, irony, and role changes to teach religious lessons. The same methods once used to make fun of the Mass were now being used to make it stronger. It is funny how that happens. Meanwhile, in non-religious Europe, the carnival style became a strong part of culture. Writers like Rabelais, with his strange humor and upside-down worlds, continued the feast's lack of respect. Jesters in the king's court kept making fun of kings. Masked parties let rich people act like poor people, and poor people act like gods just for one night. In this manner, the feast did not disappear. It spread out. It broke into many customs. Each one had a piece of that old wildness. The laughing went from the altar to the stage. The masks went from big churches to carnivals. And the idea, question power, laugh at fancy shows, turn the world over, stayed complete. It also had a more rebellious effect. During revolutions in France and other places, satire became a political fighting tool again. Songs, drawings, and shows made fun of kings and church leaders. It was just like the fools did long ago in the main hall of Notre Dame. The fool might have swapped his donkey for a printing machine, but he was still whispering about protest behind his smile. Because the Feast of Fools was not just a holiday, it was a thought. The thought was that laughing can be holy. Making fun of things can have meaning. And for one day, just one day, the world does not need to be logical. The Feast of Fools might be deep in history books now, but its message is heard through the years. There is strength in silliness. For one short, happy day, the powerful were made fun of, the holy was joked about, and the powerless took over. They did not use swords, they used laughter. It was not just a party, it was a turning over of the whole medieval way of seeing the world. In a time when the order of power was from God, where every person had a spot, king, bishop, farmer, priest, the feast asked a risky question. What if the entire system was a joke? What if the bishop's hat looked better on a donkey? What if the farmers made better popes? Of course, the very thing that made the feast work was that it stopped. Every person knew the clock would hit midnight. The special clothes would be taken off. The fools would return to sweeping floors. But that short break in the world of reality made all other things easier to handle. It was a kind of spiritual release tool. It was a permitted piece of wildness that stopped the bigger wildness of daily life from getting too much. In our time, we have received that spirit without knowing it. Every April Fool's Day trick, every comedian making jokes about politicians, every carnival parade making fun of the powerful. They all owe something to those loud French church workers braying in big churches. Even in online culture, the effect continues. Memes, joke accounts, and popular videos that make fun of company leaders, governments, and billionaires. These are the spiritual children of the feast. They use different tools, but have the same desire and the same laughter. Because sometimes the only way to get through a world made on power, fear, and control is to flip it over, to laugh at authority, to make fun of what we are told we must respect. And that is what the Feast of Fools provided to medieval Europe, a reminder that kings will die, bishops are people, and nothing is so holy that it cannot be laughed at. In the end, the fool was never only a clown. He was a mirror shown to the face of power. And for one amazing, wild, wine-filled day each year, the world looked in that mirror and saw the truth. Not holy, not perfect, just human. Imagine you get a letter with the Pope's seal on it. A servant in uniform on a horse brings it to you. You have been called to eat with His Holiness Pope Alexander VI. He is the head of the Catholic Church and the leader of the famous Borgia family. It is not just a dinner. It is the dinner. And every important person will be there. Diplomats, traders, rich men, cardinals, and maybe a few paid killers acting like poets. You get dressed with care. You wonder if this will make you rise or be ruined. Because a Borgia banquet was not just a meal, it was a show. Behind the wine, the music, and the tables covered in silk. There was a spinning storm. It was made of ambition, desire, and blood. Every drink toast had a secret reason. Every smile was mixed with planning. And every person eating knew in the back of their head that the wrong word or the wrong cup could mean the end. The tales about these banquets are famous. Some people say Pope Alexander ate under paintings of naked gods, while musicians played romantic songs. And Lucrezia Borgia, covered in jewels, gave flirtatious looks to rival kings. Other people whisper about secret doors, hidden paths, and servants taught not only good manners, but also how to be quiet. And then there is the poison. Ah, the poison. If you heard the rumors that moved through Rome like wastewater, you would hear of poison rings, slipped powders, and wine that had a small taste of almonds. Some swore that Cesare Borgia, the Pope's handsome but cruel son, had a bottle of Cantarella. It was a famous slow poison. He was ready to get rid of rivals during dessert. Was it real, or just lies spread by envious enemies? It is hard to know, but here is the scary part. No person could know for sure. And that lack of sureness, that was the Borgia brilliance. They built an air of danger wrapped in soft cloth. A person eating might eat pheasants filled with truffles. At the same time, he might look into the eyes of the man who gave the order to kill their cousin. And every person smiled, because saying no to a letter from the Borgias was more risky than saying yes. A Borgia banquet was not just put on, it was designed. Every food course, every candle, every glass of wine was carefully picked. It was meant to flood the senses and make the line between respect and fear unclear. These were not meals. They were displays of power. They were meant to amaze the eye, charm the mind, and softly tell the guests exactly who was in charge of Rome. Let's begin with the location. Halls with very high ceilings, covered with large pictures made of cloth. The floors had rose petals on them, and the tables had plates covered in gold that once were owned by defeated kings. Scented air moved through the room. It was thick with incense, myrrh, and the spiced smell of meat cooked slowly for hours. The light was not from torches. It came from chandeliers with Venetian glass. It put a warm, strange glow on everything. And the food. It was amazing. Boars filled with pheasants, pheasants filled with figs and almonds, figs soaked in honey and brought in from faraway cinnamon, whole ships of oysters brought from the coast. They were so fresh they still moved on the tongue. Dishes were piled high. They were not for eating. They were to be looked at like art. Guests were meant to eat with their eyes first. Then they were to give in to having too much. But this was not being greedy for the sake of being greedy. It was a plan. By feeding their guests like gods, the Borgias controlled them. No one is prepared for war when their stomach is full of roasted crane and sweet citrus. And the wine. Oh, the wine. It came from fountains. It was made cold with snow brought from the Apennine Mountains. It was served in cups with the Borgia bull carved on them. Waiters filled your glass again before you saw it was empty. Toasts were made all the time. To the Pope, to Rome, to beauty, to peace. But behind the raised cups, eyes were watching. Who was drinking? Who paused? Who turned pale after that third drink? Musicians played the whole time. Lutes, harps, drums. Sometimes whole groups of singers were hidden behind curtains. Their voices would rise like ghosts during dessert. Dancers performed in almost clear dresses. They got blushing cheers from cardinals. Jugglers threw flaming knives. Fire breathers shot sparks up to the high ceiling. Everything had two meanings. Every fancy thing whispered, "We have the money, the power, the fun, and the poison. Sit, eat, have a good time." And so you did. Because to say no to their welcome was a bad thing, but to have a good time, that could be risky too. At the center of every Borgia feast sat a vision in silk and scandal. Lucrezia Borgia, beautiful, smart, and always causing talk. She was more than just the Pope's daughter. She was the host of Rome's most famous events. With golden hair, gentle smiles, and a mind as sharp as any knife in her brother's belt, Lucrezia was not there to make the table look nice. She ran the table. Guests loved her or were afraid of her. Often they felt both. Her being there turned any meal into a show. She would move smoothly between diplomats and dukes like a skilled politician. She gave compliments that hurt like glass. Her laugh made even the most careful men listen closely. Her dress would shine with gold string. Her neckline was low, and her words were always chosen with care. Everything she did was a planned show. Some said her charm was magical. Others whispered that she was a piece used by her father and brother. She was bait in their deadly political plans. But those who saw her closely at these banquets saw something else. Control. Lucrezia knew exactly how to get attention, remove doubt, and change the power balance. Sometimes she did it with just one toast. She toasted a lot, and people drank. That was the issue. The stories, of course, followed her like a scent. Guests who flirted too much or asked too many questions were said to get strangely sick days later. Lucrezia was said to wear a hollow ring full of powdered poison. She could drop it into a cup with a soft move of her wrist. Real. Made up. The beauty of her being there was that no one could know, and that lack of sureness made her even more dangerous. At one banquet, it is said she read a love poem while looking right at a visiting ambassador. His quick death days later started a small diplomatic problem. The Borgias said it was sickness. Rome whispered it was murder. But still they came. Everyone did. Because not going to a banquet hosted by Lucrezia Borgia meant not being at the very center of power. And it could mean insulting a woman who could turn a smile into a death sentence. She did not have to speak loudly. She had the room in the palm of her poisoned hand. While Lucrezia acted like a siren at the main table, Cesare Borgia stayed in the dark places. He was watching, judging, and making plans. He did not have to smile. He did not have to talk. Just him being there could make a room quiet. And at every banquet, whether he sat next to his father or walked around the edges of the group, Cesare was the one everyone really feared. He wore black velvet with gold edges. He had a sword that was not just for show. Cesare gave off a feeling of danger. His actions were smooth, skilled, and planned. He could toast a foreign duke and put a threat into the talk without ever speaking loudly. And the way guests reacted, laughing too loudly, sweating too much, looking at their wine with worry, showed they knew exactly who they were eating with. These banquets were not just for display. For Cesare, they were for gathering information. He saw alliances start and break over a shared dish of roasted lamb. He checked loyalties with casual comments. He judged the goals of smaller nobles with a single raised eyebrow. His enemies made errors under the effect of wine and music. And Cesare remembered every one of them. There were stories, of course. A guest who left a feast whispering about protest was found in the Tiber River the next morning. A noblewoman who said no to his advances was quickly married to a cousin known for hunting accidents. A coincidence, maybe. But around Cesare, Coincidence seemed like a plan. At one famous banquet, Cesare supposedly planned the seating to put two rival envoys next to each other. Then he watched them almost start a fight over a spilled cup. While they argued, he acted. He signed a secret deal with a third guest on the other side of the room. By dessert, one was shamed, one was sent away, and Cesare had gotten a fortress. He liked action more than words. But when he did talk, it was important. A quiet nod from Cesare could mean a change in a political alliance or the giving of poison. You never knew. And that was the idea. Because at a Borgia banquet, the danger was not in the food. It was in the man watching you eat it. Among all the rumors that troubled the Borgia banquets, one would not go away. Poison. Stylish, quiet, and impossible to prove. Poison was said to be the family's preferred dish. It was served with charm, taken with compliments, and found much too late. If you were not lucky enough to get a letter to dine, the first rule was easy. Be careful with your wine. Whispers of a secret poison called cantarella were all over the roads of Rome. It was said to be black, without smell, and mixed with arsenic. It could be put into a cup without changing the flavor. Victims did not grab their necks or fall down during dessert. No, they would leave the banquet smiling. Then they would fall a day or two later. They would groan in pain as their insides felt like they were on fire. It was the best crime. It was impossible to trace and happened later. And who was held responsible? Often no one. Or if doubts were brought up, there was never any evidence. Just rumors, well-timed deaths, strategic moments. Stories were everywhere. A cardinal who stopped the Pope's plans died after drinking wine from a silver cup. A rival banker who questioned Cesare's money disappeared after a dinner toast. One nobleman, scared of Borgia hospitality, brought his own food checker. According to stories, the checker fell dead before the main food was served. Were these stories made bigger? Maybe. But that is the genius of fear. You only need to think it could be real. Even the cups and plates were doubted. It was said that Lucrezia Borgia wore a hollow ring. It could release powdered poison with a flick of a wrist. Others thought Cesare carried a flask with diamonds on it. It was filled with liquid death, always close by. Whether it was real or a story, the rumors gave the family power. Guests who were afraid of the poison were just as easy to control as those who were actually poisoned. Because poison did not just kill, it stopped disagreement. It made people do what they were told. It made them nervous, easy to control, and most scary of all, it made every glass of wine a risk. You could not say no to a drink. That would be an insult. You could not show fear. That would show you were weak. So you toasted, smiled, and prayed that your name was not already marked off in some dark Borgia book. Because at these banquets, it was not just about who had the sharpest words or the biggest gift. It was about who was alive to share the story. If there is one Borgia banquet that truly stuck in the shocked memory of Europe, it was the night of the Banquet of Chestnuts. A gathering so bad, so theatrically sinful, that even Rome turned red. It was held in October of 1501 inside the private rooms of the Vatican. It was not just a dinner. It was a show of planned bad behavior. It was arranged by Cesare Borgia and approved, if not enjoyed, by his father, Pope Alexander VI. Writers from that time, including the often-mentioned diarist Johann Burchard, wrote about the event in shocking specifics. 50 courtesans, chosen for their beauty, were brought into the hall. They were told to take off their clothes as the night went on. Their job was to pick up chestnuts spread on the floor using only their mouths. The guests watching, many of them church leaders and nobles, sat on velvet pillows with wine cups in hand. They threw coins and insults in the same amount. The floor shined with candlelight and sin. Food was served as the show continued. Whole roasted pigs, glazed fruits, and spiced custards were all passed around. The room became more like an orgy than a feast. But this was not just thoughtless enjoyment, not for the Borgias. It was a display of power. It was a purposeful breaking of every moral and religious rule inside the very walls of the Pope's court. The message was plain. We follow no one, not the Church, not God, not Rome. Cesare supposedly gave prizes to the men who did the best that night. He measured manliness like courage on a battlefield. Lucrezia's part is argued. Some say she watched. Others say she planned part of it. Still others think she was not even there. But the connection was enough to ruin her name for many years. Many historians believe the event was made bigger, twisted by enemies wanting to dirty the Borgia name. And maybe it was. But the fact that such stories could be believed about a pope and his children tells you all about the reputation they had created. Because even if only half of it was true, the banquet of chestnuts was not just a party. It was a warning. At a Borgia feast, fun was power, shows were politics, and no bad act was too big to be shown in public. Especially when the Pope himself was clapping. Behind the silk curtains and full wine cups, there was something even more frightening about the Borgia banquets. They happened in the center of the Vatican. Not in a faraway palace, not in a private house hidden from judging eyes, but in the holy halls of the Pope's court. Where cardinals prayed during the day, they feasted at night. Where saints were respected in marble, sinners danced under chandeliers. This was not being two-faced. It was a plan. Pope Alexander VI, born Rodrigo Borgia, knew one thing better than any popes before him. How things look was the most important thing. So he made sure his looks were ones people would never forget. The feasts he had were not just for pleasure. They were made to mix the lines between the holy and the unholy. They were made to test the edges of the Pope's power. If he could make the Vatican a show of too much and still wear the keys of St. Peter, then who could stand against him? Banquets spread across halls with painted ceilings. They echoed through small churches and open yards. Religious paintings looked down on full plates and bare-shouldered courtesans. Cardinals ate next to poets, spies, and paid soldiers. The church's most holy place became a stage for control. It was a visual sign that under Alexander's rule, nothing was holy except his own desire. Even foreign envoys were pulled into the show. The banquets became traps for diplomats. They were times for watching, listening, and controlling. A single raised eyebrow from Cesare or a soft whisper from Lucrezia during dinner could change the result of whole wars. And all of it took place under the bright ceilings of the Apostolic Palace. Many people outside the Vatican were shocked. Voices wanting change were already growing across Europe. They took the rumors like a fast-spreading fire. How could the Pope, the representative of Christ, lead orgies and murders hidden as feasts? How could God's house smell of roasted meat and perfume? But that was the Borgia risk. Rule so wildly, so openly, that no one had the courage to question you. And for a time, it was successful. Until it was not. Because even the most amazing feast must finally stop. The candles go out. The guests leave. The wine is gone. And in the quiet that comes after, the world starts to ask, what did we just see? A celebration of power, or its final, desperate show. There was always a weird feeling at Borgia banquets. It was under the nice words and laughing. It was behind the velvet curtains and gold cups, because everyone knew that some guests did not go home, at least not in the same condition they arrived. It was the secret rule of every Borgia event. What took place at the table could shape your future or finish it completely. Sometimes a guest would show up full of confidence. They thought they could not be touched. A rival noble, a difficult cardinal, a traitor who had argued with Cesare in talks. They would be given a good seat. They would be toasted kindly, and they would be fed like a king. And then nothing. No fighting, no scandal, just not being there. A few days later, the news would get out. They had gotten sick or disappeared or fallen into a canal. Rome learned fast that a letter from the Borgias was both a good thing and a bad thing. Some of the disappearances were quiet. A young noble woman who criticized Lucrezia was last seen dancing at a Vatican feast. Her property went quietly to a family friend. The Spanish envoy who loudly opposed Alexander's role as pope died calmly in his sleep the night after a banquet. When his body was looked at secretly, his lips were black. Others were more shocking. One diplomat was said to have fallen down during dessert. His face landed in his plate of candied quince. The room went still. Cesare supposedly stood up, sighed, and said, "Take him away. He has lost his desire to eat." Were all of these deaths really planned? It is difficult to know. The Borgias had enemies who wanted to hurt their name, and every death without a clear reason became a part of the story. But that story had power. Because it was not the real deaths that gave the banquets their name. It was the chance of death. Every guest knew they were being observed. Every toast had a risk. Every bite of food could be the last. The mental strain was huge. And that was the idea. Even if the poison was not there, the fear was. And fear is a tool more powerful than any knife. So they smiled, they laughed, they touched glasses and complimented the hosts. And deep inside they wondered, had they talked too much, angered the wrong person, been sat a bit too near to Lucrezia? Because once you went into a Borgia banquet, you were not a guest anymore. You were a piece on a game board. Like all banquets, the Borgia feasts finally stopped. But not with a toast, not with clapping. They stopped with whispers, accusations, and a collapse. By the early 1500s, the greatness had started to decay from the inside. Pope Alexander VI was getting old. Cesare, once unbeatable, was becoming careless. And the enemies they had played with for years were no longer happy to be part of the game. The knives were ready. Alexander died quickly in 1503. Strangely, some say it was from poisoned wine intended for another person. According to rumors, both he and Cesare got sick after eating together. It was likely at one of their own banquets. The irony was perfect. The hunter was defeated by his own tools. Cesare lived, but was never the same person. His power fell apart. His friends turned against him, and he died a few years later, sent away from his home. He was bloody, broken, and far from the table where he once ruled like a prince of darkness. Lucrezia, interestingly, survived. She left Rome, married into a noble family, and became a respected duchess. Some say she felt sorry for her past. Others think she just learned to hide her plans better than her brothers. But the banquets, their real effect, lasted longer than they did. They became a myth. They became scary stories told in dark taverns. They were warning tales shared by diplomats. They inspired novels, operas, and even television shows many years later. The picture of a poisoned cup, a smiling pope, a floor covered in chestnuts. It never fully left the Western mind. Because the Borgia banquets were not just about pleasure. They were a symbol, a feast where fun hid danger, where every bite could be a betrayal, and where power was never given without a price. The table was the war zone, the food courses were the plan, the guests were either players or pieces. And in a sense, the world never stopped copying them. Political dinners, state banquets, secret deals made over champagne and caviar. These are the children of the Borgia feast. The poison is more hidden now, but the tense feeling is still very much present. So the next time you're at a fancy table with smiles, nice words, and clinking glasses, ask yourself, who is really in control here? And more importantly, what is actually in your wine? Imagine a world with no jails, police, or powerful kings. A world where the law did not come from a faraway throne, but from the ground under your feet and the family at your side. This was early medieval Ireland. It was a place ruled not by big empires, but by family connections. And in this complex system of tribe loyalty, justice had a name. It was Brehon law. For more than 1,000 years, long before the English king arrived with papers and jails, Brehon law managed the island with a quiet strength. It was not written in a law book. It was not enforced by officers with swords. It was spoken, changeable, and deeply connected to the community and honor. There were no killings as punishment. There were no sentences for life. A crime was not just a wrong against the government. It was a rip in the cloth of the community. And that rip needed to be fixed, not punished. Let us say a man broke another man's arm in a fight. Under feudal law, he would be put in a dark cell, or worse. Under Brehon law, he would have to pay an honor price. This was a carefully figured out payment in cows, silver, or items. It was decided by the victim's position, name, and wound. The aim was not to cause pain. It was to bring back balance. It was to make the hurt person complete again. And it let the community continue without falling into revenge. This set of laws did not help kings. It helped families. Every person was linked to a family group, and that group was responsible for their behavior. If a man could not pay his penalty, his family paid it. If someone did a crime, the victim's family had a right to ask for payment, not blood. It was law made for a world where people lived next to each other for many generations. You could not just get rid of your enemies. You had to find a way to live with them. At its center, Brehon law was not about control. It was about living together. It knew that in a close, honor-based community, keeping peace was more important than showing power. Justice was not a cold order. It was a group talk, a balancing action made to keep the tribe complete. This was justice by agreement. Law without a hammer. A system not of punishment, but of settling accounts and fixing things. And for many years, it was successful. In a land with no courthouses, you did not bring your problem to a judge. You brought it to a Brehon. And no, a Brehon did not wear special clothes, hit a hammer, or yell for order in a court. These were not enforcers. They were explainers, helpers in arguments, and keepers of memory. Because for most of Ireland's history, the law was not on paper. It was remembered. It was passed down by speech through years of trained law experts. Brehons were picked from special legal families. They were trained from a young age. Think of them as walking libraries. A Brehon could say centuries-old legal cases from memory. He could quote past examples with a poetic rhythm. Their task was not to give punishment. Their task was to bring back peace. They had to consider different claims, follow family histories, figure out payment, and suggest a just answer. It was law as a form of storytelling. And these were the storytellers who were trusted to tell the truth in tense times. But there is a surprising part. Brehons had no power to make their decisions happen. They could not call warriors or collect penalties by force. Their power came completely from trust. If a Brehon was smart, fair, and steady, people would listen. If not, they were not listened to. It was that simple. This made a legal culture built on reputation, not force. A Brehon's good name was the most important thing. Their decisions had to be convincing, balanced, and fair. This was because there were always other Brehons. If one seemed unfair or dishonest, a person in a dispute could bring their problem to another place. This competition made the system fair. And it was not just the rich who could use them. Poets, farmers, workers, every person had the right to find a Brehon. The law was difficult, yes, but it was for everyone. It was owned by the community, not by a group of officials. If you could state your case well or have someone state it for you, you had a possibility. Over time, some Brehons became famous. Their names are in Irish poetry and legends. They were looked up to not for power, but for wisdom, for finding peace where other people saw only fighting. So in a world of fighting families and weak agreements, the Brehon was a living connection, not between guilt and punishment, but between families, between egos, between disorder and agreement. They were not feared, they were respected. Imagine a legal system with no jails, no chains, no gallows standing in the town center. In medieval Ireland, there were no prison rooms because Brehon law did not think locking people up was right. Justice was not about hurting the body. It was about fixing the problem between people, families, and communities. If someone did a crime under Brehon law, the main point was not on getting even. It was on fixing things. What was damaged had to be repaired. If you stole cows, you gave back the cows plus extra. If you hurt someone, you paid their honor price. This was a payment based on their place in society and how bad the wound was. If you killed someone, their family got a blood penalty. This was a carefully figured out amount. It was meant to recognize the loss and stop more killing. This was not forgiveness without a penalty. It was justice made for a community without a main government. There was no permanent army, no police. So instead, justice depended on the social force of family connections and group reputation. If you did not want to pay, your family would face the results. Your honor would be hurt. You could be pushed out, avoided, or rejected. In a close village, that could mean social death. Brehon law was about keeping peace in a world where fights could get out of hand. It knew that revenge just led to more fighting. So instead of an eye for an eye, it made a system of measured payment. A wrong was not erased. It was recognized and balanced. The wound did not go away, but it was healed. It also meant that justice happened fast. There were no long trials, no years of being in jail. Arguments were heard, answers were found, and payments were given. The aim was not to take people out of the community. It was to keep them in it. They were responsible for their actions, but still a part of the group. And surprisingly, it worked. For many years, Ireland operated with this restorative idea. It was long before modern thoughts of restorative justice would be talked about in courtrooms all over the world. The Brehons knew something that modern systems still have trouble with: Justice is not just about rules, it is about relationships. So while castles in Europe were making dungeons, the Irish made a legal system that asked, not how can we punish the wrongdoer, but instead, how do we bring back the peace? In a world where most medieval legal systems saw women and the lower classes as unimportant things or property, Brehon law was different. It was not modern. It was not perfect. But when compared to feudal laws in other parts of Europe, it was amazingly advanced. In Ireland, under Brehon law, even those without swords or fancy names had a voice and rights. Let us begin with women. Unlike in much of medieval Europe, Irish women under Brehon law could have property, receive land, and leave their husbands. A wife could get back her dowry if a marriage was over. And she was not automatically put under her husband's rule. If her husband treated her badly or just did not do his duties at home, she had legal reasons to leave him. There were even types of marriage where both people kept equal say over their property. Women could also make deals, bring arguments to a brehon, and have their honor price, the value of a person in legal payment, figured out separately from their husband or father. In simple terms, a woman had a legal position. That did not mean full equality, but it meant she was more than a small note in someone else's legal story. And the law did not only cover gender, it gave protections to workers, poets, the poor, and even people with disabilities. Poets and bards, for example, had special honor prices based on their position in the poetic custom. A blind man could not be hit without big legal results. The poor could not be fined more than they could afford. If they could not pay in cows or silver, deals could be made for work or goods. Why was it so open to everyone? Because Brehon law was based on balance and position inside a tribe, not money or winning wars. Every person had a part to play, and that part came with duties and protections. Even the people who seemed to have no power were still part of the whole picture. This was not about kindness. It was about keeping the community peaceful. If the weak were hurt, the community broke apart. So the law gave them tools not to control, but to protect their dignity. In a time when justice in other places often meant power makes right, Brehon law showed a different way. A legal system that did not just ask who has power, but who is part of the group. And in early Ireland, the answer was everyone. In medieval Ireland, marriage was not finalized with rings and church bells. It was discussed like a business agreement. Often it happened over a table full of books, animals, and family records. Under Brehon law, marriage was an agreement, and like any good agreement, it explained who had what, who owed what, and most importantly, what would happen if it all ended. Forget one type for everyone. There were 10 different kinds of marriage in Brehon law. They went from equal partnerships to short-term deals. Some unions were between social equals. In these, property was combined and split fairly if the couple separated. Others were more unequal. For example, if a woman married into a richer family, but she still kept her own property rights. A woman brought a quaibche, a price for the bride, and a dowry might come later. But she did not give up everything to her husband when she married. If the relationship finished, both people kept their own property. Anything they got together was split based on the rules of their union. That is correct. Early medieval Ireland had prenups. And since money was counted in cows, so were the payments. A divorce might mean 15 cows go one way, 10 the other. And 2 might be kept as a guarantee against future arguments. Inheritance was also managed with attention. children from different marriages had rights. And being legitimate was often based more on being known in public than on church rules. But marriage was not just about love. It was about politics. Clans used it to make friendships, create peace, or bring land together. The legal structure ensured these unions were more than just for show. They were binding agreements that could be enforced under Brehon law. They had clear expectations and legal options. Approval was important. While arranged marriages were frequent, marriages by force were not legally accepted unless both people agreed. This was especially true after they reached puberty. And if either partner could not have children, neglected the home, or was unfaithful all the time, the other could ask for a legal end to the marriage. All of this was decided not by priests or kings, but by Brehons. They figured out the fairness of each case based on custom, social position, and past examples. In Brehon law, your name was your money, in a real sense. Every person had what was called an honor price. It was a legal measure of your social position. It decided how much payment you would get if someone did you wrong, and how much you would have to pay if you did someone else wrong. It was not based on money or land. It was based on status, role, and reputation. Think of it as a living credit score for your self-respect. A chief had a high honor price, so did poets, Brehons, and expert workers. A farmer or a free man had a smaller one, but it still was important. If someone insulted you in public or hit you in anger, they had to pay you an amount equal to your honor price. And if you did a crime, the penalty you paid was based not just on the damage done. It was based on who you were and who your victim was. It was a very personal system of justice. No single rates, no common sentences. Everything was judged by social and economic importance. And this meant that honor was more than just pride. It was legal money. Keeping your reputation safe was not about being vain. It had real money consequences. Gossip, lies, and public insults were not just impolite. They were crimes you could be taken to court for. If someone called you a thief or questioned your family history without evidence, they could be made to pay you in cows, silver, or goods. And people who did it again, they could have their own honor price lowered. It was a kind of social demotion that made every future interaction more expensive. This also made telling lies in legal arguments extremely risky. If you gave untrue testimony and it was found out, you did not just lose respect, you lost legal believability. And that meant your honor price went down. And with it, your power to protect yourself, ask for payment, or join in community deals. But there was a good side too. You could increase your honor price through work, loyalty, and helping your clan. A respected warrior, healer, or wise old person could raise their legal value just by living with honor. In short, Brehon law made justice into a moral system of exchange. Your actions were not judged by a court with no face. They were felt through your social world. Break trust, and it cost you. Keep your promise, and it paid you. Because in early Ireland, your good name was the most important thing. To know Brehon law, you must know what people in early Ireland thought was important. A hint: it was not castles, coins, or crowns. The true power was in land, cattle, and family. Three foundations that influenced every legal choice, agreement, and ruling in the Brehon world. Land was not owned by one person the way we see it now. Instead, it was held by the whole clan, or fine. Families farmed the land, gave it to the next generations, and protected it strongly. Single members had rights to use it, not own it. So if you left the clan, you lost your right to use the land. This meant land was not only about farming, it was about being part of the group. Your legal position could not be separated from your spot in the tribe. Cattle, on the other hand, were money, wealth, and a way to live all in one. Everything from dowries to penalties was counted in cows. Legal books even wrote down the value of certain types. 1 cow for a bruise, 5 for a broken bone, more for killing a valuable bull. To hurt someone's cattle was to hurt their wealth, and it automatically required payment. This was not just keeping records, it was a social bond. Every exchange, every legal payment was made to keep the community in balance. Cattle were not kept in large numbers. They were passed around. They were used as both payment and tools for making alliances. Giving cattle was not losing wealth. It was putting money into peace and duty. And then there was family, the unseen line connecting it all. Under Brehon law, you were never by yourself. Your actions affected your family. And your family was responsible for your debts. If you did a crime, your family paid the penalty. If someone hurt you, your family helped get the payment. Arguments were not just between single people, they were discussions at the family level. This shared responsibility created a strong reason for good actions. No one wanted to bring shame or debt to their people. At the same time, it meant justice was personal. You were not just punished by the system. You were held responsible by your own family. So when the Brehons judged a case, they did not just ask what took place. They asked whose land was affected, whose cattle were hurt, and which clan now has the burden of justice. Because in early Ireland, law was never about one person. It was about keeping the clan and the land complete. Under Brehon law, a crime was not just an action against the law. It was a disturbance in the social system. Theft, assault, even killing were not just personal wrongs. They broke the peace of the clan and the community. And unlike the punishment systems of feudal Europe, Brehon justice did not come down like a heavy object. It reached out like a balance scale. Theft, for instance, was not punished by cutting off a hand. It was punished by paying back. Often it was double or triple the worth of what was stolen. The idea was plain: give back what was gone and stop future bad acts. And it was effective, because in a community where your family shared your responsibility, taking a neighbor's sheep did not just risk your name, it risked theirs too. Assault had its own rules. There were detailed lists showing the value of every injury, from a black eye to a broken rib to the loss of a tooth. The honor price system was used here again. It made sure that payment matched not only the harm, but the social position of the victim. Violence was not overlooked. It was judged. And more importantly, it was settled. And what about murder? Even that followed the idea of fixing things over revenge. The killer did not go to the gallows. Instead, their family had to pay the irrake or blood penalty to the victim's family. It was not just a payment, it was a public statement of guilt. It was an attempt to calm the situation before a fight started. Because in a clan-based community, fights could go on for generations. One murder could begin a chain of violence that took whole families. Brehon law provided another way. It asked, can peace be brought back through payment? Can we stop more killing by accepting loss and making it right? This was not forgiveness. It was justice through finding common ground. And it required effort. Brehons had to handle complex family loyalties, political fights, and deep emotional pain. But they did it because the other option, endless revenge, was much more risky. At its core, Brehon law did not try to erase bad actions. It tried to hold them in. to take in the shock of human mistakes and guide it through custom, talks, and payment. In other words, it was not about punishment. It was about keeping peace. For more than 1,000 years, Brehon law kept Ireland together, not with chains or crowns, but with agreement, custom, and community. But by the late Middle Ages, that balance started to fall apart. The old customs fought with a new wave of outside rule, a central king, and a very different thought of what law should be. When the Normans came in the 12th century, they brought feudal law. It was strict, ordered, and based on the king's power. To them, Brehon law seemed strange. It was too local, too gentle, too pagan. The English crown, especially in the Tudor and Stuart times, saw the Irish legal custom as not just different, but dangerous. By the 17th century, Brehon law was officially forbidden. Brehons were taken of their power. Their rulings were ignored as not important. Gaelic lords who held on to the old system were called rebels or traitors. English courts took control. They brought prisons, executions, and taking of land where there used to be cattle penalties and clan talks. And still, Brehon law did not disappear quickly. In country areas, especially in the west of Ireland, people kept settling arguments the old way. Secret talks, community solutions, and honor-based payment continued in secret. This happened even as English judges wore wigs and used the king's justice. People's memory held on to the idea that justice could be about balance, not control. In recent times, Brehon law has made a quiet return, not as a working system, but as something to learn from. Experts study it. Activists use it. Restorative justice groups, both in Ireland and in other countries, look to its ideas of fixing things over revenge. They see it as a guide for making better, more human legal systems. Because Brehon law reminds us that justice is not just about following rules. It is about keeping relationships. It is about bringing back dignity. And it is about building trust again. It tells us that law can be local. It can be flexible. It can be very human. And in a world still dealing with too many people in jail, constant lawsuits, and courts that feel distant, the wisdom of early Ireland has something to tell us.